They thought the past was buried forever. They were wrong. A rusted lockbox, a forgotten journal, a name no one dares to speak. For years, an abandoned garage sat on the edge of town, collecting dust and silence. But when Calder Hayes, a struggling single father, walks through its doors, he doesn't just find broken tools and faded memories. He finds a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. At the same time, Serafina Langley, the heir to a powerful family, returns, chasing the ghosts of her grandfather's past. But the deeper they dig, the clearer it becomes. This garage was never just a garage, and the man who built it, he never truly left. Some truths are dangerous, some secrets refuse to stay buried. What would you do if the past came knocking on your door? This bridges into the call to action naturally. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed everything? Drop a comment below. Do you believe the past always finds a way to resurface? If you love mystery, drama and stories that pull at your heart, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The sun was barely rising over Willow Creek, casting a golden glow over the sleepy town as Calder Hayes parked his rusty old truck in front of what could only be described as a forgotten relic of the past. The garage stood there, its wooden sign, long faded, its windows covered in dust and grime. It looked as broken as Calder felt. He stepped out, stretching his stiff muscles after the long drive from the city. His 8-year-old daughter Eloise stirred in the back seat, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Are we home, Daddy?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. Calder forced a smile. Home. He hadn't used that word in a long time. After losing his wife in a tragic accident 2 years ago, every place had felt temporary, just another stop in a long journey of uncertainty. But this time, things had to be different. "This is it, sweetheart," he said, brushing her blonde curls back. "Our new beginning." He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. Calder approached the garage's entrance, pushing against the rusted metal doors. They groaned in protest, but eventually gave way, revealing an interior filled with dust, discarded tools, and remnants of a time long gone. Sunlight streamed in through the cracks in the wooden roof, illuminating the thick layer of neglect that coated every surface. His fingers traced the edge of a worn-out workbench, his mind flashing back to the years he'd spent under the hood. Of cars, his hands stained with grease, his heart full of purpose, before everything fell apart. This garage had been his last option. A cheap foreclosure property, abandoned for over a decade. He had spent the last of his savings on it, gambling on the hope that he could turn it into a working auto repair shop before his money ran out completely. If he failed here, there wouldn't be another chance. He could feel the weight of the gamble pressing down on his shoulders. "You think it can be fixed?" Eloise's small voice broke through his thoughts. Calder turned to her, seeing the uncertainty in her big blue eyes. "Yeah, baby," he said, forcing confidence into his voice. "We'll fix it, together." As Calder surveyed the garage, mentally listing what needed immediate attention, a black sedan pulled up outside. The kind of car that didn't belong in a town like Willow Creek. A man stepped out, Wes Dempsey, the local bank officer. Calder had met him once before over the phone when he finalized the purchase. And now, standing before him, Dempsey looked, every bit as skeptical as he had sounded. "I see you finally made it," Wes said, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine suit. His sharp eyes scanned the garage with thinly veiled disapproval. Calder wiped his hands on his jeans, suppressing the urge to roll his eyes. "Yeah, just getting started." Wes nodded slowly, glancing around. "You know, this place has a history. The previous owner, Marshall Langley, used to run it back in the day. It was a staple of the community. People trusted him. Then he vanished. No one ever figured out why. And Calder wasn't sure if the man was trying to warn him or just indulge in town gossip, but he wasn't interested in ghost stories. "I'm not here for history," Calder replied. I'm here to work. Wes smirked. Work requires money. And let me remind you, this property came with a conditional mortgage. You've got 6 months to show progress or the bank reclaims it. Calder stiffened. He knew the terms. He just didn't need the reminder. Wes took a step closer, his voice dropping slightly. I'll be honest with you, Hayes. No one's managed to make this place work in over a decade. The town's changed. You'd be better off cutting your losses now before you dig yourself into a hole you can't climb out of. Calder clenched his jaw. Thanks for the concern, he said, his voice tight. But I'm not going anywhere. Dempsey chuckled, as if amused by Calder's stubbornness. Suit yourself. With that, he walked back to his car and drove off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Eloise tugged at Calder's sleeve. I don't like him, she whispered. Calder let out a breath. Me neither, kiddo. Determined to shake off the encounter, Calder got to work, clearing out debris and organizing tools. As he pulled away an old shelf, something thudded to the floor, a small rusted lockbox. He picked it up, wiping away the dust. The initials ML were engraved on the lid. Marshall Langley. Calder frowned. Could this be something from the former owner? He tried to pry it open, but the lock held firm. Daddy, what's that? Eloise peered over his shoulder. Not sure, Calder admitted, but maybe it'll tell us something about this place. Little did he know, the contents of that box would change everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a sleek SUV rolled into town, stopping just outside the old general store. Sarah Langley, stepped out, taking a deep breath of the crisp country air. It had been years since she had set foot in Willow Creek, and yet everything still felt strangely familiar. The streets, the storefronts, the whisper of wind through the old oak trees, it was as if the past had been waiting for her. She wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here to find answers. Her grandfather, Marshall Langley, had disappeared mysteriously over a decade ago, leaving behind only rumors. But recently, a legal notice had surfaced tied to an abandoned garage he once owned. Something about it didn't sit right. Why had he left it behind? And why had the bank suddenly decided to sell it after all these years? She intended to find out. And if the man who had bought the garage stood in her way, well, he'd soon regret it. The morning air in Willow Creek carried the crisp scent of pine and fresh dew as Calder Hayes wiped sweat from his brow. The sun had barely risen, yet he was already knee-deep in clearing out the cluttered garage, determined to make progress. Beside him, Eloise perched on an old wooden stool, her legs swinging as she examined the rusted lockbox they had found the day before. "Do you think it has treasure inside?" she asked, her blue eyes shining with curiosity. Calder chuckled. "I doubt it, kiddo. Probably just some old paperwork." Or before he could finish his sentence, the distinct purr of an expensive engine filled the air. He turned, frowning as a sleek midnight blue SUV pulled up in front of the garage. The vehicle looked wildly out of place against the backdrop of the worn-down shop and the surrounding countryside. The door opened, and out stepped a woman. She was tall, with raven-black hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, dressed in tailored jeans, and a fitted leather jacket that screamed big-city sophistication. There was a confidence in her posture, a sense of belonging everywhere and nowhere at all. Calder instantly did not like her. She scanned the garage with a sharp, assessing gaze, the way a property investor might size up a failing business. Then her eyes landed on him. "You must be the one who bought this place." Her voice was smooth, clipped. East Coast, probably New York. Calder folded his arms. "Depends. Who's asking?" She took a step forward, the heels of her designer boots clicking softly against the cracked pavement. Serafina Langley. Calder's gut tightened at the name. Langley. The same name etched onto the lockbox Eloise was still holding. "I see," he said slowly. "Any relation to Marshall Langley?" A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed her face. "He was my grandfather. That explained the fancy car. Calder had no patience for people like her. The kind who had never worked a day in their lives, but still thought they had the right to walk in and take what they wanted. "What do you want, Miss Langley?" Seraphina's eyes flitted to the lockbox in Eloise's hands. "That," she said. Calder arched a brow. "Funny, I don't remember putting this place up for sale." A slow, practiced smile curled on Seraphina's lips. "This garage belonged to my grandfather. He left it behind years ago, and I have reason to believe there are things inside that belong to my family." Calder exhaled through his nose, already hating this conversation. "This garage was abandoned. The bank sold it. I bought it. It's mine now." Seraphina tilted her head, studying him. "I understand that, Mr. Hayes, but there may be items of sentimental value here that don't belong to you. I'd simply like to take a look." Calder clenched his jaw. "Let me get this straight. You and your family left this place to rot for more than a decade, and now that someone is finally trying to fix it, you suddenly care." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes darkened. "That's not what this is about." "Isn't it?" he challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like some rich city girl came back to claim a piece of history she never cared about before." Seraphina's cool facade cracked, just slightly. Eloise, sensing the tension, squeezed Calder's hand. "Daddy," he sighed, forcing himself to dial down his irritation. Eloise didn't need to witness a full-blown argument on their second day here. Seraphina took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice softer, but still laced with an edge of steel. "I just want to know if my grandfather left something important behind." Calder hesitated, glancing at the lockbox. He had planned to open it later, maybe even track down someone who had known Marshall Langley. But now, standing in front of his granddaughter, something told him he might not like what he found inside. He exhaled. "Look, Miss Langley, I don't know what's in that box yet. If it's something that rightfully belongs to you, I won't keep it. But until I know for sure, I'm not handing over anything." Seraphina studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "That's fair," she said, her tone begrudgingly respectful. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out a business card, extending it toward him. "If you find anything that seems relevant," she said, "call me." Calder took the card, but didn't promise anything. She lingered for a second longer, as if debating whether to say something else. Then, with a graceful pivot, she turned and strode back to her SUV. Calder watched as she drove away, leaving behind a swirl of dust and unanswered questions. Eloise tugged at his sleeve again. "Daddy, do you think she's telling the truth?" Calder ran a hand through his hair. Did he? He didn't trust Seraphina Langley, not yet. But she had hesitated before leaving, and that hesitation told him there was more to this story than she was letting on. "She might be," he admitted. Eloise glanced at the lockbox, then up at him. "So, are we going to open it?" Calder looked down at the box, the initials M.L. practically staring back at him. Not yet, not until he was ready. He wrapped an arm around Eloise's shoulder and gave her a gentle squeeze. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get to work." For now, the lockbox and the past could wait, but not for long. The old garage smelled of dust, motor oil, and something less tangible. History, the kind of history that clung to the walls, whispered in the cracks of the wooden beams, and lingered in the silence between Calder Hayes and his daughter. Calder sat at the workbench, elbows resting on the scarred wood, staring at the rusted lockbox as if it might open itself. Eloise leaned closer, her small hands tracing the engraved initials. "Daddy, what if it's something really important?" Calder sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Could be." could also be nothing. But deep down, he doubted that. The way Serafina Langley had reacted to the box told him otherwise. She had tried to play it cool, but Calder had spent years reading people. Customers at the garage, loan officers at the bank, cops after his wife's accident. People always gave themselves away. And Serafina Langley, she was hiding something. Still, he wasn't ready to let her or anyone else dictate what happened next. He grabbed a flathead screwdriver, wedged it into the seam of the lockbox and twisted. The metal resisted at first, then gave a quiet pop as the latch broke loose. Eloise sucked in a breath. "Oh, open it, Daddy." Calder lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a brittle sheet of yellowed newspaper, was a small leather journal. He pulled it out, brushing away dust. The leather was cracked from time and use, the pages fragile. The first thing he noticed was a name scrawled inside the front cover in faded ink. A chill prickled down Calder's spine. He turned the pages carefully. The handwriting was rough but readable. Letters written with a heavy hand, the ink smudged. In places, the first entry dated back more than 20 years ago, August 14th, 1999. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but I need to put it somewhere. "A man shouldn't take secrets to his grave," Calder frowned. "Secrets," he kept reading. "This garage has been my life, my pride. But I made a mistake. One I can't fix now, one I don't deserve to fix." Calder flipped through more pages, his pulse picking up. There were entries about the town, about customers Marshall had helped, but the words hinted at something deeper. Then he reached an entry that made his stomach tighten. December 2nd, 2003. She came today. Same dark hair, same eyes. She didn't know me, but I knew her. I thought time would dull the guilt, but it only sharpens it. I need to tell the truth before it's too late. Calder exhaled, his fingers tightening on the journal. Who was he talking about? Eloise was still staring at him, wide-eyed. "What does it say?" Calder closed the book gently. "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart." But he knew one thing. Serafina Langley needed to see this. The reluctant messenger. The last thing Calder wanted was to march into town and hand Serafina anything, especially after their tense conversation. But something in his gut told him that whatever was in this journal, she deserved to know. So later that afternoon, he left Eloise at the local diner with Mrs. Callahan, an older woman who had taken a quick liking to his daughter, and drove toward the Langley estate. It was impossible to miss. A grand colonial-style house sat at the edge of town, surrounded by towering oak trees and an iron gate that probably cost more than his entire garage. Calder sighed, tightening his grip on the wheel. Rich people. He pulled up near the entrance, debating whether to knock or just toss the journal over the fence and be done with it. Before he could decide, the front door swung open. Serafina stood there, wearing a crisp white blouse and dark jeans, her sharp gaze locking onto him like she'd been expecting him. "You must really enjoy surprising me," she said. Calder pulled the journal from his pocket. "Found this in the garage. It belonged to your grandfather." For the first time, since meeting her, her expression faltered. She stepped forward, reaching for the book, as if she wasn't sure whether to take it or not. "What's inside?" "You tell me," Calder said. "Looks like he had some regrets. Something about someone he saw years ago." Serafina's fingers curled around the leather cover. She hesitated, then opened the journal, scanning the pages. As her eyes moved across the words, her face changed from curiosity to confusion, then to something heavier. She swallowed hard. This doesn't make sense." "Which part?" She glanced up, something raw in her expression. "My grandfather, he never talked about his past, never. But if he wrote about someone he recognized, someone he felt guilty about, that means—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I need to read this." Calder studied her for a moment. She wasn't playing games now. This was real. Finally, he nodded. "Let me know what you find." She hesitated. "Wait." He turned back. Serafina took a deep breath, as if struggling with something. Then, finally, she said, "Thank you." Calder raised an eyebrow. "Did that hurt?" She let out a small, reluctant laugh. "A little." For the first time since meeting her, Calder almost smiled. Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving her alone with the ghosts of the past. That night, Calder sat on the front steps of the garage, watching Eloise chase fireflies. The town was quiet, except for the distant hum of crickets and the occasional sound of a car rolling down Main Street. As much as he hated to admit it, he couldn't stop thinking about Serafina, not just because of the journal, but because of the way her mask had slipped, even for a moment. There was more to her than he'd assumed, more to this story than either of them had realized. And somehow, Calder knew, this was just the beginning. The soft hum of the crickets outside the Langley estate was the only sound in the room, as Serafina Langley sat at her antique oak desk, the leather-bound journal open before her. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the pages, illuminating the faded ink and trembling handwriting of a man she had known all her life, but perhaps never truly understood. Her grandfather, Marshall Langley, had been a pillar of the town, a respected businessman, a generous benefactor. He had provided jobs, funded scholarships, and even helped struggling families stay afloat. But this journal told a different story, a story filled with guilt, regret, and a truth he had kept buried for decades. Serafina's fingers tightened around the worn pages as she reread the entry Calder had mentioned. She came today. Same dark hair, same eyes. She didn't know me, but I knew her. I thought time would dull the guilt, but it only sharpens it. I need to tell the truth before it's too late. Her pulse quickened. She turned the page, scanning for more answers. But the next entry was ripped out. Only jagged remnants of paper remained, teasing at a secret that had been deliberately erased. Her stomach twisted. Had he meant to destroy it, or had someone else? She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the knock at first. It wasn't until the second, firmer rap that she blinked, shaking herself out of her daze. Serafina stood and smoothed the creases from her blouse before heading for the door. When she pulled it open, she wasn't surprised to find Calder Hayes standing on the porch, his broad frame illuminated by the dim glow of the porch light. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms. Calder shoved his hands into the pockets of his worn jeans. "I could ask you the same thing about that journal." Serafina sighed, stepping back. "You might as well come in." Calder hesitated, then stepped inside. The contrast between his rough, oil-stained hands and the pristine, polished world of the Langley estate was stark. He scanned the elegant sitting room, mahogany furniture, marble fireplace, framed paintings that probably cost more than his truck. He didn't belong in a place like this, and he had no intention of staying longer than necessary. Serafina gestured toward the journal on the desk. "I read through most of it. It's unsettling." Calder leaned against the edge of a leather armchair, crossing his arms. "Yeah? Find anything useful?" Serafina exhaled sharply, running a hand through her dark hair. "That depends on what you define as useful. My grandfather clearly had unfinished business, and whoever this woman was, she meant something to him. Or he did something to her," Calder said flatly. She flinched. "You don't know that." "Neither do you." The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. Serafina looked away first. "There was more," she admitted. "Entries that hinted at a deal gone wrong, something that weighed on him for years. But then—" She turned the journal around, pointing at the torn pages. "Someone ripped out the most important part." Calder frowned. "Do you think he did it himself?" She shook her head. "No. My grandfather was meticulous. He kept records of everything. If he had intended to erase something, he would have done a better job. Someone else did this. That made Calder uneasy. A man like Marshall Langley didn't just keep secrets. Someone wanted those secrets buried. "I need to find out who he was talking about," Serafina said, "and why he felt so guilty." Calder studied her. "Why does it matter to you now? You spent most of your life away from this town." Serafina stiffened. "Because he was my grandfather." "That's not a reason," Calder challenged. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something real beneath the sharp edges of her demeanor. "He raised me," she admitted. "My parents were too busy with their own lives. He was the only one who ever really cared." Calder didn't expect that answer. She continued, softer this time. "If there's something about his past that doesn't add up, I need to know. I need to understand who he really was." He exhaled slowly. "Then we start at the garage." Serafina arched a brow. "We?" Calder smirked. "You don't seriously think I'm going to let you snoop around my place without supervision, do you?" She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. An hour later, under the cover of night, they arrived at the old garage. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light over the worn structure. Calder unlocked the door and stepped inside, flipping on the single exposed bulb that dangled from the ceiling. Serafina followed, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked, brushing dust off her sleeve. Calder grabbed a crowbar and gestured toward the oldest section of the garage, the back office. "Whatever's missing from that journal, I'm betting it's still here." Serafina hesitated, then nodded. Together, they tore through cabinets, pried open drawers, and moved old crates. Dust filled the air, making Serafina cough. Then Calder spotted something, a loose floorboard, slightly raised at the edges. His pulse quickened. "Give me a hand," he said, kneeling. Serafina crouched beside him, her breath shallow as he wedged the crowbar beneath the board and pried it up. Something was hidden underneath, a metal lockbox. Smaller than the one they had found earlier, but eerily similar. Serafina reached for it, but Calder stopped her. "Wait." She frowned. "What?" Calder ran a hand over the lid. Unlike the first lockbox, this one had no initials, no markings. That meant whoever hid it didn't want it to be found. He inhaled deeply. Then, without another word, he opened it. Inside, wrapped in another aged newspaper, was an envelope. Calder picked it up carefully. The ink had faded, but one thing was clear. It was addressed to Marshall Langley, from someone named Eleanor. Serafina's lips parted. "Eleanor?" Calder flipped the envelope over and froze, because in the corner, written in faint, slanted script, was a date, December 2nd, 2003. The exact same day her grandfather had written, "She came today." Same dark hair, same eyes. A chill ran down both their spines. Serafina whispered, "We just found her." And suddenly everything about the past felt dangerously close. The envelope in Calder Hayes's hands felt heavier than paper should. The air inside the old garage thickened, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see if he and Serafina Langley would dare to open it. Serafina's fingers hovered near the edge of the letter, but she hesitated. "Eleanor," she murmured. The name tasted unfamiliar on her tongue, yet something about it sent a chill down her spine. Calder exhaled through his nose. "Your grandfather wrote about seeing someone who looked like her. Same dark hair, same eyes. That was nearly 20 years ago." Serafina swallowed hard. If he felt guilty about it, that means whatever happened between them wasn't good. They exchanged a look. Then Calder tore open the envelope. Inside was a single aged letter, the ink faded but still legible. Serafina took a deep breath and began to read aloud. "December 2nd, 2003. Marshall, I don't know if you ever meant for me to find you. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just dumb luck. But the moment I saw you again, I knew. You've spent your life hiding from the truth, And I can't blame you. I did too for a long time, but I deserve to know why you walked away. Why you left her. She grew up without a father, Marshall. She deserved better. Eleanor's silence followed. Serafina's grip on the letter tightened. He left someone. Calder's mind raced. No, he left a child. Serafina folded the letter, carefully, but her hands were shaking. There's no last name, no return address. Calder ran a hand over his jaw, processing. If Eleanor wrote this to him in 2003, that means she had a child before that. At least in the late 80s or early 90s, Serafina pressed a hand to her forehead. God, if my grandfather had another family, that means you might have a half-aunt. Or, Calder hesitated, a half-sibling. Serafina shook her head. No, that's not possible. If he had another daughter or son, wouldn't my family have known? Wouldn't my parents? She stopped. Calder caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Her parents hadn't exactly been the most attentive people. Would they have cared enough to notice? Serafina let out a slow breath. We need to find Eleanor. Calder nodded, agreed. But there's a problem. This letter is 20 years old. For all we know, Eleanor is... He didn't say it. Serafina lifted her chin. We find out either way. By morning, they had a plan. Calder had lived in Willow Creek long enough to know that if someone wanted answers about the past, the best place to start was the town diner. People around here never forgot anything. Inside Callahan's diner, the scent of coffee and warm cinnamon rolls filled the air. Eloise was already seated at the counter, swinging her legs as she sipped hot chocolate. Mrs. Callahan, the owner, had taken an instant liking to her, and Calder wasn't about to argue. Serafina, and Calder slid into a booth near the window. A waitress, Josie Tanner, approached with her notepad. Mornin', Calder, and... Well, I don't believe I know you. Serafina Langley, she introduced herself. Josie's eyebrows lifted slightly. Langley, huh? Didn't think I'd see one of you back in town. Serafina stiffened, but remained composed, Calder cut in. Actually, we were hoping you could help us with something. Josie tapped her pen against her notepad. Depends on the question. Calder leaned forward. Do you remember an Eleanor from around here? Someone who would have been in her 40s or 50s back in 2003? Josie's pen stilled. A shadow passed over her expression before she carefully schooled it. Why do you want to know? Serafina set down her coffee cup. We think she might have known my grandfather, and we found a letter she wrote to him. Josie sighed, glancing toward the kitchen, as if making sure no one was listening. Then she lowered her voice. I knew an Eleanor, she admitted. Eleanor Reeves. She worked at the old textile mill before it shut down. Sweet woman, but life wasn't kind to her. Serafina leaned in. What happened? Josie hesitated. She left town. Calder frowned. Left? Or was forced out? Josie pressed her lips together. She had a baby when she was young. No one ever knew who the father was, but there were rumors. She met Serafina's gaze, something sympathetic yet wary in her eyes. Serafina's throat tightened. Rumors that it was my grandfather. Josie nodded slowly. She never said it outright, but everyone in town knew she had feelings for him. Then one day she was just gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Serafina's hands curled into fists beneath the table. Calder spoke next, his voice steady. Do you know where she went? Josie sighed. Last I heard, Atlanta. But that was years ago. Calder and Serafina exchanged a glance. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Outside the diner, the morning sun cast golden light over the town, making the moment feel surreal. Serafina exhaled. If she's in Atlanta, we need to go there. Calder crossed his arms. Slow down. We don't even know if she's still there. Serafina looked at him, determination flashing in her eyes. So we find out, Calder sighed. You're really doing this? She lifted her chin. Aren't you? Calder studied her. He had planned on fixing up a garage, not unraveling a decades-old family mystery. But now he was too deep to walk away. He let out a breath. Looks like we're going to Atlanta. And just like that, the past was no longer waiting. It was calling. The road stretched ahead of them, endless and bathed in the golden hues of the setting sun. Atlanta was still a few hours away, but the weight of their journey had already settled deep in Calder Hayes's chest. He didn't like leaving Willow Creek, not when the garage was still in pieces, not when he had a daughter who needed stability. But the more he thought about what they had uncovered, the more he realized. This wasn't just Serafina's search for answers anymore. It was his too. He glanced at her in the passenger seat. Serafina Langley sat with her arms crossed, staring out the window as if lost in thought. She had been quiet since they left town, but her tension was palpable. Finally, Calder broke the silence. "You sure you're ready for whatever we find?" She exhaled, still watching the blur of trees outside. "No, but I can't walk away from it now." Neither could he. They arrived in Atlanta by nightfall, the city's bright lights blinking like distant stars against the dark skyline. The address Josie Tanner had given them led to a small, worn-down apartment complex on the south side of town. The building had seen better days. The paint was peeling, and the metal staircases groaned underfoot as they climbed toward the second floor. Serafina hesitated in front of apartment 2B. A single name was etched into the mailbox beside the door. E. Reeves. Calder watched her inhale deeply before she knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. From inside, footsteps shuffled. Then the door cracked open, revealing a woman in her 60s, her silver-streaked hair pulled back into a loose bun. Her eyes were tired, cautious, as if she had spent a lifetime expecting bad news. "Who are you?" she asked. Serafina swallowed hard. "Are you Eleanor Reeves?" The woman stiffened. Her eyes darted between them. "Who's asking?" Calder stepped in. "We found a letter you wrote to Marshall Langley." The woman's breath hitched, so faint, so brief, that someone less observant might have missed it. Then, in the next heartbeat, her expression shut down completely. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly, starting to close the door. Serafina blocked it with her hand. "Wait, please. We just need to talk." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I don't talk about the past." Serafina's voice softened. "I think I might be part of it." For the first time, something uncertain flickered in Eleanor's gaze. Long silence stretched between them. Then finally Eleanor sighed and stepped back. "Come in," she said quietly. The apartment was small but neat. A few framed pictures lined the shelves, though most were turned face down, as if their memories were too painful to display. Eleanor motioned for them to sit at the modest kitchen table. She remained standing, arms crossed over her chest, watching them carefully. "Tell me," she said, "what exactly do you think you know?" Serafina placed Marshall's journal and the letter on the table. "I know you wrote this," she said, "and I know my grandfather felt guilty about something." About someone. Eleanor's face remained unreadable. "And?" Calder leaned forward. "And we think that someone was you, or the child you had." For the first time, Eleanor's guarded demeanor cracked. She reached for the letter with trembling fingers, as if just seeing it again after all these years had pulled her back to a different lifetime. Then she whispered, "He never wrote back." Serafina's breath caught. Calder frowned. "So it's true then. He left you." Eleanor let out a bitter laugh. "He left more than me. He left his daughter." Serafina stiffened. "His daughter?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes glassy with memory. "Her name was Rose." Serafina's fingers curled into fists against her lap. "I have an aunt." Eleanor swallowed hard. "You had." A beat of silence. Serafina froze. Calder's gut sank. Had. Past tense. She's gone, Eleanor said softly. She passed away. Years ago. Serafina blinked. How? Eleanor turned away, her hands gripping the back of a chair. She got sick. I did everything I could, but we didn't have the money for the kind of care she needed. She exhaled shakily. By the time I wrote to Marshall, I was desperate, but he never answered. Serafina stared at her, the weight of an entire lost, life pressing down on her chest. He didn't know. Eleanor let out another bitter laugh. Oh, he knew. He just chose to look away. Calder watched Serafina's shoulders tighten. He recognized that look, the way someone's entire belief system cracked under the weight of the truth. Do you have any idea, Eleanor whispered, what it's like to watch your child die, knowing the man who could have helped her just turned his back? Serafina's voice was barely a breath. I'm so sorry. Eleanor closed her eyes, as if trying to block out the ghosts of the past. Then she turned to Serafina, her voice quieter but sharp. I don't need your apologies, Miss Langley, she said. I need you to tell me why you're here. Serafina hesitated. Then finally she admitted, because I need to know who my grandfather really was. Eleanor studied her for a long time. Then with a sigh, she pulled something from a small wooden box on the shelf. A photograph. Serafina reached for it. It was faded, yellowed with time. A young woman rose, smiled in front of a run-down house, her hair the same shade of dark chestnut as Serafina's own. The resemblance was undeniable. This, Eleanor said softly, is the niece you never got to meet. Serafina traced the edges of the photo, tears stinging her eyes. Calder watched the scene, something heavy settling in his chest. He had come here expecting secrets. He hadn't expected loss. After a long moment, Eleanor exhaled. If you want to understand your grandfather, she said, start with the people he left behind. Serafina swallowed hard. Will you help me? Eleanor's gaze was guarded, but not unkind. That depends. Are you looking for redemption or just a way to ease your conscience? Serafina didn't have an answer, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she ever would. The drive back to Willow Creek was silent. Serafina sat in the passenger seat, staring at the faded photograph of Rose, as if she could will the past into something different. The woman in the picture, her aunt, had the same high cheekbones, the same dark eyes that stared back at Serafina from the mirror every morning. A woman she had never known, whose entire life had been erased before Serafina even had a chance to ask about her. Calder kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles tight on the steering wheel. He could feel the weight of what they had just uncovered, pressing into the silence between them. It wasn't just about Marshall Langley's past anymore. It was about what Serafina would do now that she knew the truth. They reached Willow Creek by late afternoon, the sun dipping low behind the hills. The town looked the same, unchanged, untouched, as if the past 24 hours hadn't completely shifted Serafina's world. Calder pulled up in front of the garage, and the familiar sight of the rundown building was almost comforting. But waiting for them on the porch was someone unexpected. The bank officer straightened when he saw them step out of the truck, his expression unreadable. Dempsey, Calder greeted warily. Didn't think you were the welcoming committee. Wes tucked his hands into his pockets. We need to talk. Serafina narrowed her eyes. About? Wes exhaled. About the garage, and about your family. Serafina stiffened. What about my family? Wes hesitated for half a second, just long enough for Calder to catch the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Then he said, There's something you don't know. Serafina crossed her arms. I just found out my grandfather had a secret daughter. I think I'm well aware that I don't know a lot of things. Wes's jaw tightened. Then maybe you should sit down for this. Inside the garage, Wes unfolded a stack of documents on Calder's workbench. The paper looked official, too official. Serafina snatched one and scanned it, her frown deepening. Then she went completely still. Calder watched as the color drained from her face. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. Wes cleared his throat. "A property transfer agreement." Serafina's hands shook. "You're telling me my father tried to sell this garage behind my grandfather's back?" Calder's stomach dropped. Serafina's father? Gerald. Langley had known about this place, had known about Eleanor, about Rose, and yet instead of helping, instead of acknowledging what his father had done, he had tried to erase it all. Serafina clenched her jaw. "When?" Wes hesitated again. "The papers were drawn up in 2004, after Marshall disappeared." Serafina's breath hitched. He had disappeared right after Eleanor sent that letter. Calder exhaled sharply. "Your father knew." Serafina's fingers tightened around the paper. "He knew my grandfather abandoned a child, and instead of making it right, he tried to bury it." Wes shifted uncomfortably. "The sale never went through. Marshall put protections in place to keep the bank from seizing the property outright. That's why it's been sitting in limbo all these years." Serafina dropped the document onto the table like it burned her. "He wasn't just trying to sell a building, he was trying to erase an entire part of our family." Her voice shook, but Calder saw it, the moment when anger replaced shock. Lines drawn in the sand. "Where is he?" she demanded. Wes blinked. "Who?" Serafina's dark eyes burned. "My father." Wes hesitated. "He's still in Willow Creek, stays at the country club when he visits." Serafina grabbed her keys and turned for the door. Calder stepped in front of her. "Hold on," he said. "Think this through." Serafina's hands were clenched into fists. "There's nothing to think about." "Yeah?" Calder raised a brow. "Because from where I'm standing, you're about to walk into his office and blow everything up." "And what exactly is your plan after that?" Serafina's chest rose and fell rapidly. He could see the war raging inside her, the need to confront her father, to demand answers, to make him pay for what he had done. But Calder also knew something. Gerald Langley had spent decades getting away with things like this. If she stormed in without a plan, she'd never get what she really wanted. Her breathing slowed. Then she turned away, not toward the door, toward the journal still sitting on the workbench. "We do this the right way," she murmured. "We find out everything, we gather proof." She glanced at Calder, her jaw tight. "And then we make sure he can't hide from this anymore." Calder nodded, stepping aside. "Now you're thinking like someone who wants to win." That night, as Serafina sat alone in her grandfather's office, flipping through the remaining pages of his journal, Calder leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He wasn't sure when he had started caring about what happened to her, but he did, more than he should. "Serafina," he said quietly. She looked up, eyes still stormy with unspoken thoughts. "What?" Calder hesitated. "You sure you want to do this?" She held his gaze. "I don't think I have a choice." And deep down, Calder knew she was right. They had started a journey that couldn't be undone, and soon there would be no turning back. The next morning, Serafina Langley woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in days. She had spent the night poring over her grandfather's journal, rereading every entry, searching for details she might have overlooked. But there was no escaping. The truth, Marshall Langley had left behind more than a legacy. He had left behind a wound, and her father, Gerald Langley, had tried to bury it. Now she was going to make sure he couldn't run from it any longer. She wasn't naive. Her father was a powerful man, one who had spent his entire life controlling the narrative, shaping the world around him to suit his ambitions. But Serafina had spent her life learning from him, and she knew exactly how to play his game. Calder was already awake when Serafina walked into the garage that morning. He stood at the workbench, arms crossed, watching as she entered. "You're up early," he said. Serafina grabbed a cup of coffee from the counter. "So are you," he smirked. "You gonna tell me what's on your mind, or do I have to guess?" She took a slow sip, then met his gaze. "I'm going to the country club." Calder raised a brow. "Bold move. You planning to walk in there and call your father a liar in front of all his rich friends?" "No." Serafina set her coffee down. "I'm going to give him a chance to tell me the truth," Calder exhaled through his nose. "And if he doesn't?" Her jaw tightened. "Then I'll make sure everyone else does." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll drive." The Willow Creek Country Club was a place of quiet wealth. White columns, manicured golf courses, servers in crisp uniforms. Serafina had grown up here, playing by the rules of people who never had to fight for their place in the world. She knew exactly how this place worked, and she was about to set fire to it. As she stepped into the grand lobby, Gerald Langley was exactly where she expected him, in the lounge, a glass of whiskey in hand, speaking with men who still believed a firm handshake was worth more than the truth. When he saw her, his expression barely changed. "Serafina," he greeted smoothly. "I wasn't expecting you." She didn't smile. "We need to talk." His eyes flicked to Calder, who had positioned himself just behind her, arms crossed. Gerald's mouth pressed into a thin line. "I assume this is about your little field trip to Atlanta." Serafina's stomach tightened. He already knew. Of course he did. He always did. She didn't let it rattle her. "I found Eleanor Reeves." For the first time, her father's grip on his glass tightened. Serafina saw it, the flicker of unease. But it was gone in a second, replaced by the same controlled indifference he had perfected over the years. "I don't know why you're so fixated on this," Gerald said. "It's ancient history." Serafina's nails dug into her palm. Rose wasn't history. She was family. Gerald sighed as if she were being difficult. "Serafina, no." She stepped closer. "I know you tried to sell the garage. I know you wanted to erase everything my grandfather left behind." Her father exhaled sharply. "I did what was necessary. That place was nothing but a relic of the past. It had no value." Serafina's voice dropped to a whisper. "It had value to them." Gerald's jaw ticked. "You think you've uncovered some great injustice, that Marshall was a perfect man who made one mistake?" He scoffed. "He abandoned a woman, yes, but he also abandoned you. He left you nothing but a garage full of dust, and now you're running around trying to dig up a past that should have stayed buried." Serafina felt her breath catch. Not because he was right, but because he was so utterly cold about it. She had spent her entire life trying to earn his approval, trying to live up to the expectations of a man who had never truly seen her. And in that moment, she saw him clearly, not as her father, but as a man who had spent his life making sure his power was never threatened. Calder, silent until now, finally spoke. "You're afraid," he said simply. Gerald's eyes snapped to him. "Excuse me." Calder shrugged. "If none of this mattered, you wouldn't be sitting here drinking whiskey in the middle of the afternoon, waiting for us to show up." He leaned forward. "You're afraid of what happens when people find out what you did." Gerald's nostrils flared. Serafina saw it, the first real crack in his mask. Calder pushed further. "You didn't just try to cover up what Marshall did. You built an entire life on making sure no one ever found out." Gerald set his glass down, slow and deliberate. "Be careful with your accusations, Mr. Hayes." Calder smiled. "It wasn't friendly. I don't make accusations. I just call things the way I see them." Serafina finally spoke. The final blow. "I'm keeping the garage," she said. "And I'm keeping every piece of my grandfather's past, whether you like it or not." Gerald's expression darkened. "That would be a mistake." "No," Serafina lifted her chin. "The mistake was thinking you could control me forever. Her father's lips pressed together. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Serafina's voice was steady, unwavering. "Yes, I do." She turned on her heel and walked away. Calder followed, only stopping once to glance back at Gerald. "By the way," he said casually, "whiskey's a little early in the day, don't you think?" And with that, they left. Serafina didn't speak until they reached the truck. Then she let out a long, shaky breath. "You okay?" Calder asked. She nodded, but it wasn't entirely convincing. He didn't push. Instead, he just said, "For what it's worth, I think you scared him." A small smile tugged at her lips. Good. They both knew this wasn't over. Gerald Langley wouldn't back down easily, but for the first time, Serafina wasn't afraid of him, and that was a victory. The tension hadn't lifted since Serafina left the country club. The confrontation with her father had drained her in ways she hadn't expected. She had prepared herself for anger, for denial, for manipulative attempts to gaslight her into believing she was chasing ghosts. But she hadn't been prepared for the sheer, unshakable coldness of his response. She had seen no regret in his eyes. No remorse? Only calculation. And that terrified her more than anything else. By the time she and Calder pulled up to the garage, the air had shifted. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the lot. Calder hadn't spoken much since they left the country club, but now, as they stepped inside, he finally said, "You should know something." Serafina turned, arms crossed. "What?" Calder exhaled. "Men like your father don't just let things go. If he thinks you're a threat, he's not going to sit back and watch." Serafina lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of him." Calder studied her for a moment. "You should be." Before she could argue, the garage phone rang. A cold prickle ran down her spine. Calder grabbed it before she could. "Hayes Auto." A pause. Then his jaw tensed. He extended the phone to Serafina. "It's for you." She hesitated, then took it. "Hello." Her father's voice came through the receiver, calm, controlled, deadly. "Serafina, I warned you." Her grip tightened. "I didn't realize you were taking bets on whether I'd listen." Gerald sighed, as if disappointed. "I hoped you'd be smarter than this, but I should have known. You're your grandfather's granddaughter, after all. Always too emotional, always too stubborn." Her stomach curled with anger. "If that's all you called to say, don't waste my time." A low chuckle. "Oh, this isn't a warning anymore. Sweetheart, it's a courtesy call." A knock sounded at the garage door. Calder's entire body tensed. Serafina turned just as the door swung open, and two men in suits stepped inside. Everything happened fast. Calder moved in front of her, a wall of steel between her and the two men. His hands curled into fists, his stance all fight. The taller of the two men, mid-50s, silver hair, tailored suit, held up his hands in mock surrender. "No need for trouble, Mr. Hayes." Calder didn't move. "That's funny, because you walked into my garage like you were looking for it." The man smiled. "I'm just here to deliver a message." Serafina gritted her teeth. "My father doesn't have the nerve to do it himself?" The man shrugged. "Mr. Langley has a very busy schedule." Calder's voice was low, dangerous. "Then maybe he should stop wasting time threatening his own daughter." The man's smile didn't waver. "Oh, this isn't a threat, it's an offer." He pulled a manila envelope from his jacket and placed it on the workbench. Serafina didn't touch it. "What is this?" The man's tone stayed light. "A very generous financial settlement. Mr. Langley is willing to ensure you never have to worry about money again, under one condition." Serafina already knew what it was. "Walk away." The man nodded. "Leave Willow Creek, leave the garage, leave the past in the past." Calder let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, and if she doesn't?" The man's smile didn't fade, but his eyes darkened. "I'd strongly suggest she does." Serafina's blood boiled. Her father was buying her silence, the last Langley mistake, swept under the rug like everything else. but she wasn't a mistake to be erased. She reached out, grabbed the envelope, and tore it in half. The man didn't react. "You might want to reconsider that decision." Serafina stepped closer, her voice deadly quiet. "No, you tell my father he might want to reconsider underestimating me." A flicker of something, approval, amusement, passed through the man's gaze. Then he turned toward Calder. "I'd be careful if I were you, Mr. Hayes." Calder's voice was a growl. "And I'd be careful walking out of here with all your teeth intact." The tension stretched tight as a wire. Then, as if they had all the time in the world, the man and his companion turned and left. The moment the door swung shut, Serafina exhaled hard, pressing her hands to the workbench. Calder turned to her. "You okay?" She let out a bitter laugh. "I just turned down a life-changing amount of money and pissed off the most powerful man I know. How do you think I'm doing?" Calder leaned against the counter. "Honestly, I think you're holding up better than most would." Serafina ran a hand through her hair. "I don't know what he's going to do next." Calder met her gaze. "Steady. Sure. He's going to push harder. Try to make you break." Serafina clenched her jaw. "Then let's make sure I don't." Calder watched her carefully. He had met a lot of people in his life. Some who ran at the first sign of trouble, some who fought battles that weren't worth fighting. But Serafina Langley, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to care more than he should. That night, Serafina sat alone in her grandfather's office at the estate, flipping through the last pages of his journal. For so long, she had wanted his approval. Now, she just wanted the truth. A final entry caught her eye, one she had overlooked before. "I should have done more, I should have told the truth, and now I can feel the walls closing in. I don't have much time." Serafina's pulse pounded. Her grandfather hadn't just disappeared. Something had forced him to, and whatever that was. Her father was at the center of it. She shut the journal. No more waiting. Tomorrow she would end this, no matter what it cost. The next morning, Serafina Langley woke up knowing that the day ahead would change everything. There was no turning back now. She had spent the last few weeks unraveling the tangled web of her grandfather's past, her father's betrayals, and the family secrets buried beneath decades of deception. And now she had one final move to make. Serafina sat in Marshall Langley's old study, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover of his journal. The weight of it felt heavier than before, as if it had absorbed every secret it held. But there was one entry, one final entry, that refused to leave her mind. "I should have done more. I should have told the truth. And now I can feel the walls closing in. I don't have much time." The words weren't just guilt-ridden ramblings. They were a warning. Her grandfather had known something was coming for him, and the last person to see him before he disappeared. Serafina took a deep breath. Today, she would get the truth out of him, one way or another. The Langley estate had always been imposing. White columns, sprawling acres, and a sense of untouchable wealth. But as Serafina pulled up the long driveway, it no longer felt like home. It felt like a battlefield. She stepped out of the car, determination coiling tight in her chest. Calder was beside her, his stance solid. He had insisted on coming, not because he didn't think she could handle it, but because he knew she shouldn't have to do it alone. She didn't argue. They walked through the grand doors, and as if expecting them, Gerald Langley was already seated in his study, a glass of bourbon in hand. His expression didn't change. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Serafina." Serafina didn't waste time. She threw Marshall's journal onto the desk in front of him. "Read the last entry." Gerald didn't even glance down. He simply swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I'm sure whatever's in there has been keeping you entertained." Serafina's jaw tightened. He was afraid, wasn't he? He knew something was going to happen to him. Gerald sighed, as if exhausted. "Your grandfather had plenty of enemies. Not everything is a conspiracy, darling." Serafina leaned in. This isn't about his enemies. This is about you. For the first time, Gerald's cool exterior cracked. Calder crossed his arms. Where did he go, Gerald? A long silence stretched between them. Then Gerald set his glass down. You're so desperate for answers, he murmured. Fine, I'll give you one. He stood, walking toward the window, his back to them. Your grandfather came to me the night before he disappeared. He said he wanted to make things right. He wanted to acknowledge Eleanor and her daughter. He even wanted to add them to his will. Serafina's stomach twisted. Gerald turned, his gaze sharp. Do you have any idea what that would have done to this family? To me? Serafina's hands curled into fists. You mean to your reputation? Gerald smirked, but there was nothing amused about it. It would have ruined everything. Serafina took a step closer. So what did you do? Gerald studied her as if deciding whether she was ready for the truth. Then, with calculated precision, he said, I made sure he disappeared. Silence. Serafina's heart stopped. Calder's body tensed beside her. Serafina barely recognized her own voice when she spoke. You had him killed. Gerald didn't flinch. I did what was necessary. Her pulse roared in her ears. All these years, all the questions, the unknown, and now the answer stood right in front of her. Her own father had made sure her grandfather never got the chance to set things right. Calder's voice was deadly quiet. Where is he? Gerald's expression darkened. Gone. Serafina took a shaky breath. You don't get to decide what happens next. Gerald gave a small, humorless chuckle. And what do you think you're going to do, sweetheart? Expose me? Serafina lifted her chin. No. She pulled her phone from her pocket and turned the screen toward him. It was still recording. Gerald's face fell. Serafina's voice didn't waver. You just confessed to murder, and now I have the proof. His mask shattered. Serafina. His voice dropped low. Turn that off. She didn't. Instead, she hit send. And just like that, the recording was gone. Emailed, backed up, impossible to erase. Gerald's breathing turned sharp. You have no idea what you've just done. Serafina's expression didn't change. No, father, you have no idea what you've done. The sound of sirens pierced the air outside. Gerald's face drained of color. Serafina turned to Calder, her voice steady. Let's go. And as the front doors burst open, as law enforcement stormed the Langley estate, Serafina walked away without looking back. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't running from her family's past. She was rewriting its future. The storm had passed. It had taken less than 24 hours for Gerald Langley's empire to crumble. His confession, recorded and sent to multiple sources, had set off a chain reaction he could no longer control. By the time the authorities arrived at the Langley estate, there was no escaping what he had done. His name, once spoken with power and reverence, was now tainted with scandal. And Serafina, for the first time in her life, she was free. A week later, Willow Creek felt different. Serafina stood outside Marshall Langley's garage, her garage now, watching as Calder worked beneath the hood of an old Chevy truck. The familiar hum of an engine turning over filled the air, along with the scent of motor oil and sun-warmed pavement. It was almost strange, how normal it felt after everything. How right. Calder wiped his hands on a rag, then looked up at her. You gonna keep staring, or actually help? She smirked. I think we both know I'm better at supervising. He chuckled, shaking his head. Serafina hadn't left Willow Creek after her father's arrest. She could have. No one would have blamed her, but leaving would have meant running again, and she was done running. Instead, she had spent the past few days finalizing the legal transfer of the garage, ensuring that the place Marshall had once built, and nearly lost, would stay right where it belonged. She turned to Calder. It's officially mine, you know. He raised an eyebrow. You mean ours? Serafina rolled her eyes. You really think I'd let you walk away after all of this? Calder smirked. Didn't think so. The truth was, They had built something here, not just a garage, not just a business, but a life. And for the first time, Serafina could see herself in it. That afternoon, Serafina drove to the outskirts of town, where the rolling green hills met, the sky in a quiet, peaceful stretch of land. She walked through the small cemetery, stopping at a modest headstone. Rose Reeves, her aunt. The woman she would never meet. Serafina knelt, setting down a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I found her, Rose," she whispered. "Your mother. She never forgot you." She swallowed past the lump in her throat. "I won't forget you either." A soft breeze swept through the air, rustling the leaves above her, and for the first time, Serafina felt like her family's ghosts could finally rest. That evening, back at the garage, Calder sat on the steps, sipping a cold beer. The sky was painted in hues of orange and violet, the stars just beginning to peek through. Serafina joined him, tucking her legs beneath her. "So," she said, "you planning to stick around?" Calder took a slow sip before answering. "Depends. You planning to keep bossing me around?" She smirked. "Obviously," he chuckled. "Then I guess I'm staying." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he turned to her, something unreadable in his expression. "You know," he said, "when I first came here I thought this garage was just a place to fix cars, a job, a way to make ends meet." He shook his head. "But it's more than that." Serafina nodded, understanding. "It's a second chance." She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had been a stranger not so long ago, but who had become her anchor, her partner, her friend, maybe something more. She exhaled softly. "Yeah, it is." Calder hesitated, then finally said, "So what happens now?" Serafina smiled. "We build something good." She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. "And this time," she whispered, "we don't do it alone." Calder squeezed her hand in return. The past was behind them, and the future was theirs to make. What would you have done if you were in Serafina's shoes? Would you have fought for the truth or walked away from the past? This story reminds us that sometimes uncovering the truth isn't just about looking back, it's about reclaiming the future. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between letting go and standing your ground? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, if you love gripping mysteries, heartfelt drama, and powerful life lessons, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Where you won't miss any of our upcoming stories, because trust me, there are so many more waiting to be told. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Your support means the world, and I love creating these stories for you. If this story touched you, consider giving it a like. It really helps more people discover our content. And most importantly, keep being curious, keep believing in the power of stories, and keep searching for the truth, because sometimes the past isn't just a memory, it's a lesson waiting to be learned. See you in the next video.